Hi, my name is Maria Haji-Georgi. I am a fourth-year doctoral fellow at the University at Albany, SUNY, and I'm studying educational psychology and methodology with a focus in special education and emotional and behavioral disorders. I'm also a teacher, and I'm certified in New York for grades 1 through 6.
Hi everyone, my name is Shawna Belanger. I'm an associate at the New York State Office of Special Education Technical Assistance Partnership for Behavior. I'm also a doctoral student at the University at Albany, SUNY, studying educational psychology and methodology with a concentration in special education and a research focus on students with emotional behavioral disorders.
Some important background information before we get started. When we talk about students in special education or students with an emotional disturbance or emotional and behavioral disorders, we have to recognize that this is a social justice issue. We can't really talk about special education or emotional disturbance or EBD without talking about race. We know that Black students are twice as likely to be placed in special ed under the ED category than students in any and all other disabilities combined. Disproportionality in special education has been well documented at this point. Students with ED also have the highest dropout rates across all disabilities, and it is almost double what it is for all disabilities combined. And when you look at the trends, these dropout rates have barely improved over the last 10 years. What we are or what we aren't doing to engage these students to help them and to keep them in school clearly isn't working. Not only do these students have a really high chance of dropping out of school, but as schools, we also suspend and expel these students at higher rates than other disabilities. Being removed from school decreases school connectedness, it increases alienation, and it increases conflicts with adults. A lot has been done in recent years to reduce the number of suspensions and expulsions for students, but we still need to think about what we can and should do once we have the students in school. How can we engage them? So now we have a group of students who drop out of school or are removed from school. They end up being more alienated from their school community. They feel less connected to their school. They feel more isolated. They're having more conflicts with adults. Where do many of these students end up? And the answer is the school to prison pipeline. In fact, Black males who do not complete high school are 10 times more likely to serve time in prison than Black males who finish college. So we need to start thinking about how we can make schools more engaging and supportive for these youth. In the center of this slide, you'll see a blueprint that Simpson et al. Laid out for fundamental, effective practice components for programs that are made for students who have EBD. So you can look at all of these different components and you can ask yourself, what is your school doing? What are you doing? Which components do you have and which can be strengthened? In the age of constant defunding of education, I know this is an ideal world picture, but how can you incorporate these systems and supports with what you already do have? And if you're not seeing desired effectiveness in some of these programs that you are already implementing, can you ask yourself if you've got the key component to the blueprint? Do you have qualified and committed professionals? People who understand the impacts of trauma or how culture shapes behavior? Are your teachers and professionals getting caught in power struggles? We know that the behaviors displayed by many students with EBD are perceived as aversive by their teachers, and that leads to teachers' rejection of these students, which further increases their alienation and subsequent behavior problems. We need to stop this cycle if we want to form better relationships with our students. Others have brought up the importance of listening to and collaborating with students and parents in reducing the entryway to the school to prison pipeline. They've talked about fostering meaningful relationships between students and adults in schools and providing training for teachers on classroom management, implicit bias, and cultural competence. These are all things that can be done to help engage students with EBD. Why are teacher student relationships important for this population of learners? Well, active teacher involvement and supportive teacher student relationships has been shown to significantly lower the chance of dropping out, and this effect is especially strong for students with the highest dropout rates. For students who are at risk for EBD, teacher-student relationships have been shown to impact academic competence, behavioral outcomes, and school engagement. As Kern pointed out, teacher-student relationships might be overlooked as changes in education, such as increased class size and an emphasis on academic achievement, overshadow the importance of social and emotional development. We know that the presence of a supportive adult can also protect against many of the risk factors that are associated with EBD, including dropout. What else can it do? What do we know about teacher student relationships for students with EBD and how they impact the trajectory of these students' lives? This is what we aim to find out with our study. For this project, we asked the following questions. How is the teacher student relationship conceptualized, and how has it been defined for students with EBD? How is the teacher student relationship measured when examined in a context with students who have EBD? And what are the influencing variables and associated outcomes of teacher student relationships for students with EBD? The research that is included in this review pertains to students who have been identified as emotional disturbance, ED, or EBD. So we did not include articles that said that students were at risk or had problems that were related to emotional or behavioral needs. We stuck with the label of ED or EBD to make sure that we were capturing that specific population. We also looked only at studies that had some type of tool or assessment method that is designed to capture the teacher-student relationship itself or has a distinct component within it to capture the teacher-student relationship. We entered the keywords shown at the top of the slide and all combinations of them into the databases Education Source, ERIC, and PsycInfo. For all articles that met our criteria, we conducted forward and backward searches through Google Scholar until no new articles were found. In total, we collected 11 empirical articles that met our criteria and were included in our review. After we had our final list, I collected data from the resulting articles that related to the research questions. Shawna then collected data from 25% of the articles to ensure inter-rater reliability. Once that was met, we merged our data and found that it was incredibly difficult to draw any distinct conclusions because the articles were all vastly different. So together we decided on some common themes that emerged and prevailed across the articles, and we'll be reporting our results as such.
In this section of our presentation, we're going to discuss the results of our literature review. We're going to highlight some of our key findings, the first of which addresses the first part of our first research question, which is how is the teacher-student relationship conceptualized or defined within the research for students with emotional behavioral disorders? We examined the articles included in the review and found that some researchers grounded their research in theory. 3 different theories were present across the literature, and those included the dynamic systems approach to human development, Bowlby's attachment theory, and Bronfenbrenner's ecological approach. Researchers also conceptualized teacher-student relationships in other ways, including the teacher-student relationship as a type of working alliance, using the developmental systems perspective as a component of school connectedness, using the 8 broad teacher-student relationship variables identified by Cornelius White, and some were even aligned to the conceptualizations and factor structures of existing measurement tools. Only one article from our review explicitly included a definition of a teacher-student relationship, in this case defined as a teacher-student alliance. Valenti and colleagues 2019 provided the following definition. A healthy teacher-student alliance begins with a strong bond, which includes a shared sense of warmth, trust, and connectedness. A positive alliance is also strongly rooted in a sense of agreement between the special education teacher and the student regarding the educational and behavioral goals of the school setting, as well as the daily tasks performed by both parties to achieve those goals. The information presented here addresses the second part of our first research question, which is, how is the teacher-student relationship measured as it relates to students with emotional behavioral disorders? A variety of measurement tools were used across the literature depending on a number of factors, including how the researchers conceptualized or defined the teacher-student relationship, as well as depending on the research question being asked. The measurement tools used across the literature included the student-teacher relationship scale, the original version as well as a modified version for use with older students and their teachers, the student-teacher relationship survey, the Working Alliance Inventory short form, the Classroom Working Alliance Inventory, the Classroom Assessment Scoring System, the People in My Life instrument, and the Questionnaire on Teacher Interaction. The majority of these tools are either teacher or student self-report, with the exception being the Classroom Assessment Scoring System, which uses an outside observer. Here we will discuss some of the key findings across the studies, specifically those that might be important for teachers and other service providers working with students with emotional behavioral disorders. Murray and Greenberg, 2001, found that students with disabilities are more dissatisfied with their teachers and reported poorer school bonding than students without disabilities. More specifically, students with emotional behavioral disorders have greater dissatisfaction with their teachers and poorer school bonding than students identified with learning disabilities and other health impairments. Bremen and colleagues, 2018, found that there are developmental links between teacher-child closeness and disobedience. More specifically, they found that boys with emotional behavioral disorders experiencing less teacher-student closeness showed more disobedience, which in turn negatively affects the development of a positive teacher-student relationship. Other researchers, including Capron and Hammond 2014, Garwood and Moore 2019, and Zolkowski 2019, were interested in finding ways that teachers could support the development of positive teacher-student relationships with their students with emotional behavioral disorders. They found things such as spending time with their students, not discriminating against specific students, having patience and the ability to take a joke, listening, providing equal attention and praise, respecting students, having a willingness to explain and explain again, providing students with the opportunity to explain themselves, telling students nicely when they've made a mistake, enforcing rules fairly, caring about students and their learning, being kind and ensuring that students are doing well, offering to help emotionally when they're escalated, and expressing to students that they can be successful were all ways in which teachers can build and support the development of positive teacher-student relationships with their students with emotional behavioral disorders. Other research was more focused on measurement outcomes and measurement tools. Cipriano et al. 2018, Knowles et al. 2019, and Van Loan and Garwood 2020 examined different teacher-student relationship measurement tools for use with students with emotional behavioral disorders and their teachers. Overall, the research indicated that the measurement tools used to measure teacher-student relationships may not be psychometrically reliable and/or valid in their original form to capture the teacher-student relationships between students with EBD and their teachers.
Overall, what we saw from doing this study was that there are very few studies that focus on teacher-student relationships for students with EBD. There were a lot of papers that came up for behavioral problems or at-risk students, and a lot of articles that seemed to allude to the idea of measuring teacher-student relationships, but then once we downloaded those articles and saw them, there was actually no measure for the teacher-student relationship.
There is currently a lack of a clear definition of teacher-student relationships as they pertain to students with emotional behavioral disorders.
Also, the conceptualizations of teacher-student relationship with students with EBD vary across the literature. There are a lot of different ways to think about teacher-student relationships, whether it's from the teacher perspective, the student perspective, an outside observer, and even within that, you can be looking at it through a very different lens depending on your theoretical framework.
There is also a lack of psychometrically valid instruments for measuring student-teacher relationships between students with EBD and their teachers.
And some other practices that you can try with your students: become an advocate for your students, get to know your students, learn about their lives outside of school. This is a great opportunity to practice empathy and compassion. Use active listening. Show that you care and genuinely listen with the intent to understand. Elicit feedback from students and adapt accordingly. This isn't really a place for your ego to step in and build walls between you and your students. You can also journal with your students. You can encourage and provide a safe space for their expression. Some things they might not feel comfortable speaking with you, but they might feel comfortable writing about it. Also, problem solve with your students. Don't come up with the solutions for them, but work together to establish that working alliance and see yourselves as on the same team rather than against each other. You can be working together towards a common goal. Remember that students are partners in their education and respect their autonomy. Be open to collaborating with other teachers and professionals and parents and families. If somebody has something that's working, be open to trying that. And also reach out to other adults who are finding strategies that work with these students or who are building healthy relationships with these students and see if there is something that can be learned from that. And last but not least, celebrate their successes with them. Lastly, I'd like to leave you all with this quote: "The demonstration of authenticity, trustworthiness, and affirmation of the dignity of students with EBD are essential ingredients to developing relationships with them."